Welcome, and thank you for taking part in job hazard analysis training. The purpose of this training is to coach you on using the job hazard analysis document to identify all the hazards in your workplace, assess the risk posed by those hazards, and assign controls to those hazards. But first, a quick refresher on hazards and risks. In order to proceed, we must first distinguish between a hazard and a risk. A hazard is any source of potential damage, harm, or adverse effects on someone or something, whereas a risk is the consequence or result of exposure to a hazard. In the image below, you see how the UV radiation of the sun is the hazard, and the risk is sunburn if exposure to the sun is not controlled. To better understand this distinction in the context of our work, let's consider the example of using a cut-off saw to cut asphalt. The cutting blade is a hazard if contact is made during use or if the blade gets stuck while in use. The risks associated with these hazards are cuts, severs, strains, and sprains. Dust and fumes deriving from the cutting process and exhaust are also a hazard. The risks associated with these hazards are respiratory irritation, damage, and disease. Noise produced by the cutting process and the saw is another hazard. This hazard poses a risk of causing hearing damage. And the awkward and static position that the process places you in is a hazard that creates a risk of musculoskeletal disorders such as back pain. Fundamental to hazard management is risk rating. Measuring and rating risk is a systematic evaluation that helps us to 1. Understand how risky a task is, and 2. Develop measures for eliminating or controlling identified hazards. The following factors must be assessed to rate the risk posed by a hazard. We assess accident frequency and severity, jobs where accidents occur frequently or where they occur infrequently but result in disabling injuries. Potential for severe injuries or illnesses are also assessed. The consequence of an accident, hazardous condition, or exposure to harmful substances are potentially severe. We assess newly established jobs due to lack of experience in these jobs. Hazards may not be evident or anticipated. Modified jobs are assessed. New hazards may be associated with changes in job procedures. And infrequently performed jobs are assessed. Workers may be at greater risk when undertaking non-routine jobs. Use the risk matrix on the JHA document to help you rate all tasks. Rating a task prior to controls requires you to consider if the task were to be undertaken without health and safety planning and coordination. Any task that receives a rating of 3 or higher cannot be completed without applying controls that then reduces the risk rating to 2 or less. Your aim is to achieve ratings of 1 wherever possible. The JHA document has 8 sections, and therefore it is completed in 8 steps. Those 8 steps are best completed in the order seen here. We will now have a detailed look at each of the 8 steps. JHA Step 1, Project and Workplace Details. Most of the answers are known without any help. Ask the project manager if uncertain. Every site requires at least 1 certified first aider. Health and safety reps are only required when 5 or more workers, people not performing management functions, are regularly present. A second in command is required only when 4 or more workers could be left without supervision. EPP refers to the Emergency Preparedness Plan document in the project binder. Make sure it is completed and reviewed by all site staff. And make sure to fill in the afternoon weather details by the end of each day. JHA Step 2, Daily Inspection. Complete this daily inspection prior to doing hazard analysis, as it will alert you to all hazards that need analysis, and it will ensure that the site is in safe condition for everyone, including the public. Check off every item after inspection. If any notable inspection observations are made, make a note. JHA Step 3. Identify all tasks. Note all the tasks that you will perform on this day. If you have more than 6 tasks to perform, use a second JHA document. Note all the tools, equipment, and materials that will be used. Careful not to bundle multiple tasks into a single step. Example, if you are cutting asphalt, then lifting and piling it with an excavator, those should be 2 separate tasks. JHA Step 4. Identify all hazards. Identify all known hazards for all the listed tasks by selecting from the list. Place a check next to every hazard that applies. If you think of any others, add them to the appropriate Other section based on whether the hazard is physical in nature or other. JHA Step 5. Assign initial risk rating. For every task, select the risk rating without controls. To do this, consider how risky the task can be if the people in this specific environment just go at it without any initial thought or discussion about health and safety, and use the risk matrix on the JHA to pick a number between 1 and 5. If you are thinking that a number that ends with 0.5 is best, round up. Circle the selected number next to the task. JHA Step 6. Assign controls. For every hazard that is checked off, assign at least one control that eliminates or reduces the risk of the hazard to a reasonable level. When selecting controls, consider your options based on the hierarchy of controls. To properly assign controls, you must understand the hierarchy of controls. The most effective forms of control are elimination, because hazards are physically removed and cease to exist. An example of elimination using the cutoff saw example would be to replace the entire asphalt surface, which removes the need for cutting. The next best control option is substitution. Here a hazard is replaced with a lesser hazard. Using the cutoff saw example again, substituting a standard cutoff using a walk behind substitutes to a lesser hazard. Elimination and substitution provide the greatest degree of risk reduction. The application of these controls occur at the source of the hazard. Engineering controls isolate people from the hazard. The hazard remains present in this case. A walk-behind saw is also an example of engineered control, as is the muffler and blade guard on any saw. Engineering controls reduce risk by prevention or limitation of exposure. The application of these controls occurs along the path between the hazard and the worker. Administrative controls change the way people perform the work assigned to them. An example would be a written safe work practice. And PPE simply applies personal protection to the worker, such as eye and hearing protection. Administrative controls and PPE reduce the risks through the use of safe work practices and safe job procedures, complemented by mandatory PPE. These two controls occur at the worker and are therefore a last line of defense. When selecting controls for all the hazards you've identified, apply the following criteria. Start your consideration at elimination and work your way down. Use multiple controls. Don't just select one when more than one is better and possible. Consider the training and experience of your team members. And the controls are sufficient only when you have achieved a risk rating of low or better. If a task includes the use of a hazardous product that has a safety data sheet, that safety data sheet must be kept on site, referenced for hazards and controls, and that task must be noted on the JHA. For example, if you have the task of seal pipe hole gaps in manhole using sackcrete, you must note the requirement of dust mask and eye protection for dust/fumes, and waterproof gloves/skin/eye protection for chemical exposure, just like the safety data sheet recommends. JHA Step 7. Assign post controls rating. After all controls are identified, re-rate every task in the last column of the JHA using the rating chart on the bottom of the JHA. If you are unable to bring the risk down to a 2 or 1, you may not complete the task without first contacting the project manager for help. When doing the work, apply all controls on the JHA to all tasks on the JHA. JHA Step 8. Review and sign the JHA. The JHA must have everyone's approval. What does this mean? Not everyone has to take part in the physical completion of the JHA. All work contributors must have the time to review and contribute to the JHA prior to starting work activities. The JHA must be revised when valid suggestions are made. All revisions must be reviewed by all contributors. Initial reviews must be signed and revisions must be initialed. Visitors must also sign and review the JHA after being given a summary of the hazards they must be aware of and the controls they must observe. In summary, JHAs must be completed daily and understood by the entire site team before any work begins. Apply all the controls noted in the JHA to the actual work. JHA must be kept up to date, revised with any changes to the work or work environment, and have visitors sign in using the JHA after giving them a summary.